Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for a Learning and Growing webinar on creating an inclusive classroom with course climate. Our presenter today is Christina Herbin of Washna Community College. My name is Sidra, and I'll be your moderator today for Hawks Learning. We will have a live Q&A session after the presentation today, so if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A module as we go, and we'll answer them at the end. I'll now hand it over to our presenter.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. And then let me just share my slides here and we'll get started. There we go. Yeah, so welcome everyone. So yeah, my name is Christina Herbin, and just thank you all for joining me this afternoon just to discuss more of what it means for us to create an inclusive classroom. Just a little background about myself. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am a faculty member in the Behavioral Sciences Department at Washtenaw Community College in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I've worked as an educator for it's been 11 years now. And I've mainly been teaching psychology classes and human services courses. And in addition to teaching, I'm also a licensed professional counselor. So I work in private practice, mainly with college age students and young adults. And when I think about just inclusivity and like things like course climate, it's really important for me just as a professional, as an educator, but also as a therapist with the clients that I serve in private practice. And just some other fun facts about me. I just love all things nature, just like the rivers, going hiking, and then anything sweet. Those are like my go-to things, just some fun facts about me. But I would want to know just who's in the room today. So you are more than welcome to just change your Zoom name to your preferred name. And if you're comfortable, you can share your personal pronouns if you'd like. And then maybe type in the chat where you're from and if you have a favorite season. Yes, I see California, fall, California, summer, Virginia, Chattanooga, spring, South Carolina, spring, Alabama, Massachusetts, fall. Yes, I'm seeing all the seasons except winter. hmm Yeah, thank you all for just sharing your quick introductions of your favorite seasons and even where you are today. So I appreciate you all from joining from pretty much all over the country. So we are going to spend today talking more about our class climate. And if you've lived in a state that experiences like the 4 full seasons, you know that the weather can change like in a week or even in one day. And in our classrooms, we're also likely to see the weather or that climate change or vary from one class to another. And the class climate is really dependent on the instructor and the students within that particular course. So today we're going to define course climate. We'll explore some key strategies on how we really promote inclusion in the classroom that truly embraces the diversity that you actually see in your classroom. And then we'll end by just reflecting on some key strategies that have really worked with creating that warm and welcoming environment. I always like to start by just sharing some helpful expectations in this shared space. And especially when you're having conversations related to diversity, equity, inclusion, or belonging, And some of these ground rules consist of just safety. So I know it's important for us all to have that sense of safety to share if we feel comfortable. And like I mentioned, you're more than welcome to share if that's something that you feel comfortable with. No one is forced to share in the chat. And next is responsibility. So it's really important for us to take responsibility for our own learning and our interactions by using I statements and not speaking for like all people. And next is respect. So it's key just in these virtual spaces to just be aware of just how we treat each other. And I guess you all necessarily can't see what's in the chat. And then lastly is interactive. So this is more of a virtual space. So there will be times where you can respond to a prompt by sharing your thoughts within the chat. And I also value interaction. So I know as an instructor, I don't like to be placed on this pedestal because we're all vessels for knowledge and experiences. And this can really serve as that collaborative space for us to really share our experiences and our expertise. And setting ground rules like this, it's really helpful for us just to start your class off in the beginning of the semester. Or setting expectations is helpful, especially if you're going to have like a difficult conversation about a subject matter. So it really sets the intentions of how you and your students plan to interact with each other. And sometimes I take it a step further where I have my class come up with the ground rules or expectations. And by doing that, it really helps to create personal ownership and really helps us know how we can maintain that respectful and welcoming environment. So now we think about just how we define class climate. So now more than ever, instructors are tasked with creating these inclusive environments for all students to learn. And the course climate, it is a really important aspect in creating inclusive spaces. But creating a supportive learning environment for all students can be quite challenging. And one of the questions we might ask is like, where do we even begin with creating this space? Course climate is defined as the intellectual, social, and emotional and physical environments where students actually learn. And we sometimes think of course climate as either good, like welcoming and inclusive, or bad, like being very unwelcoming or even discriminatory. But it's much more complex than that. And we'll discuss that a little bit further. And a student's feeling of belonging is linked to their motivation levels, their participation in the classroom, and just their overall academic performance. And when students feel that their perspectives are valued and affirmed, they're more likely to engage in discussion with their peers or even about the course material, which correlates to just stronger academic performances for those students. So we're going to look at some of the key factors that affect the course climate. So we'll first start with course demographics. When we think about who's actually in our classroom, is this a homogeneous course where, excuse me, everyone has a similar identity, or is this class filled with so much diversity? Like I have experience teaching classes where I had students that ranged in age from 16 to 80. So just think about just the the conversations we had, just having so much diversity just with age. Next is the physical setting. So think about those times that you were in a classroom that was maybe too hot or too cold or too smelly or too cramped. There's not enough space. And think about how that can really impact our attention and just our ability to learn. So next is our interaction with students. So are you someone who takes the time to learn your student's name? And students feel more welcomed when the instructor takes the time to just know their name. Another thing to think about is, have you developed a structured syllabus with assignments that have rubrics, or there's a level of transparency about what's expected of your students? And then in your syllabus, do you use inclusive language in your syllabus? To think about just the wording of how you're even describing the nature of your class. And then we also can model inclusive language just through our interactions with our students. So, based off how we interact, our behaviors, that can really showcase if we are intentional about creating an inclusive space. Another question to ask is, are you available to interact with your students before or after class? And those interactions really matter. When we talk to our students before or after class, or just like a simple hello, or how are you, or did you have a good weekend? Those are ways we can really humanize our role as instructors. And this will increase the likelihood of us developing that positive interaction with our students. And when we think about our peer to peer interactions, are we allowing our students to share their own personal stories just related to the course material by really helping students to understand the material much better? Are we asking and encouraging questions just to provide that interactive nature of our lectures? And questions can really help to initiate that student to instructor and peer to peer interactions. And by providing that positive reinforcement of course, when people do raise their hands, it really encourages students to want to actively to participate in discussions more often. And how many of you naturally use positive reinforcement in your classrooms? So, for instance, things like, oh, that's a great point, Anna, or um, that was a great question, April, or I appreciate you volunteering, Alan. Like, those are ways that we can really model that sense of positive reinforcement. And then raise your urges, you can say yes in the chat. Is that something that you commonly do already? And I do see a question earlier. Let me see. Modeling inclusive behavior by our actions. Can you give some examples? Just even just by our body language, eye contact, um, calling someone by their name, walking around the room, not just staying in one spot. So those are some helpful ways that we are being intentional about how we're engaging our students. Yeah, and thinking about positive reinforcement, think about how that makes us feel as humans. Like when we're reinforced, we want to do that behavior again. So we may see students wanting to raise their hand more just by us showing that level of engagement. And like I mentioned, it does make us just feel good internally. So the next area to think about is just accessibility and diversity of course content. So are you someone who's deliberate and thoughtful to just include resources from diverse perspectives, underrepresented individuals, or equity deserving populations? And we know that diversity is like this huge umbrella. So it can include gender, race, um, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation. So it's a huge variability of how we can really define diversity. And a question to really ask yourself as well is, how do my course materials reflect my current students? So it does take some intentionality, even as we're preparing the course content for our classes. And class climate has to do with how the instructor is setting up the course. And instructors and students share that responsibility of co-creating the conditions for learning. And we know that an effective classroom environment is really built upon respect. So when instructors have that caring attitude and we're committed to the success of our students, all that shows that we care about our students' academic success and their personal growth. So we do that just by being intentional about creating a course climate. And we know that challenges are likely to arise when we are creating a course climate. Like this is not an imperfect process. Some of the challenges that we're likely to see can include things like inflammatory language. So this is someone making offensive statements, stereotypes, all that can be quite harmful. Even things like microaggressions in the classroom. And those microaggressions can occur from an instructor or a student. We also don't want to privilege some perspectives over others. Um, we know that we live in a society where there are these systems that creates this hierarchy of differences, but we don't want to reinforce some of these oppressive behaviors in the classroom. Another thing to note is that all students can learn, and it's not meant for us to lower our standards based off an assumption we may have about a student, like based off their identity. Like we can recognize that not all students are going to start at the same point, and it is important for us to meet students where they are. Next is just instructors can really make a commitment to removing obstacles for students. All students can perform to their best abilities and reach their full potential. And some students may just need a reminder just to know what services and supports are available, whether it's tutoring, whether it's the writing center, and even some type of learning support services. So those are all ways we can support our students and meet them where they are. And then we also don't want to get into a habit of only providing examples from one cultural group. Classrooms are filled with such diversity in culture, so we need to be mindful of the fact that some of our cultural references, whether it's to religion, certain holidays, or sports, it may be disinclusive for others. and that could affect the learning environment. If students feel that they don't belong, learning is much harder. And I do see another quick question in the chat about just inclusive language in the chat. I think when I think of inclusive language in the syllabus, I know some instructors that are really like put not in capital letters, like do not do this, do not do that. Um, Only email me this amount of time. So I think just making your syllabus language really friendly and welcoming is what I mean by like inclusive language in your syllabus. So rather than say, I'm not going to respond to emails after 9 p.m., rather say, like, um, I will happily respond to emails within 12 to 24 hours. So it's just thinking about how we can make our language more welcoming and friendly just by the nature of the words we use in our syllabus. So we're going to talk through like what we can do. We know that those student to student interactions or the instructor to student interactions, they really set the tone for the entire classroom. So creating an inclusive space, it honestly is the responsibility of everyone. So we're going to discuss just some of the key strategies that help us to create a climate that embraces students' varied identities, their experiences, their backgrounds. So we'll discuss how to build like that warm and welcoming environment where students can experience that sense of belonging. So we'll look at rapport building, avoiding assumptions, and then we'll define this concept of centralizing versus marginalizing. So we're first going to start with rapport building. Rapport building is defined as a harmonious relationship between people who have first established trust. So, this mutual trust. And respect and trust, they really open the door for any relationship to grow. So, knowing our student's name, their preferred name, their personal pronouns, this is really our first step in establishing respect and trust. And we know that a person's name, this is their greatest connection to their identity. So, us calling a student by their name, it gives the impression that you care about their success. And this really helps us to develop that sense of trust. And then we can really connect through our conversations. We can learn more about our students' interests, their hobbies, uh, their future career goals, and just showing that genuine interest in caring about who they are as a person. We also can find ways to relate to students. And you can do this in just whatever way is comfortable for you, because each person will have their own level of self disclosure. So some instructors will want to share about their hobbies or their interests, or share even how you spent your weekend. Others can share related to the particular course material. So, for instance, you could say a statement like, well, I remember how hard it was for me to understand this concept as a student. So, don't hesitate to reach out and just ask questions. Students sometimes forget that we're humans. Like we're humans first, and then we're instructors. And students, they'll appreciate you showing like your humanness. So next, we really want to avoid assumptions. And we're making decisions every day in favor of one group to the detriment of others without us even realizing it. And this is unintentional bias that pretty much appears in every aspect of life, even in the classroom. So studies have found that boys are called on more often than girls when they raise their hands just in a classroom. And every person has a level of implicit bias. And that implicit bias can be about the type of music we like, the type of cars we like, and even people. And this is not to excuse the fact that we all have them, but to recognize the harm of bias, especially with certain groups. And we know that certain groups within our society, they experience greater level of harm than others. And even people who have the best intentions, we're still influenced by like our hidden attitudes. And this often leads to us to behave in ways that can create disparities. And implicit bias is defined as our attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, our actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. And psychologists, they like to define this term by saying that we have like these unconscious mental associations. So we're constantly making associations and assumptions about others and even our students. So we're going to practice just the power of associations. And I'm going to ask you to type something in the chat. I'm going to say a word, and I want you to type the first word that comes to mind when you hear the word that I'm going to say. So the word is peanut butter. So type the first word that comes to mind when you hear the word peanut butter. Yep, so I'm seeing in the chat a lot of jellies, food, protein, creamy, allergies, poor food. Yeah, and even when I see allergies from Lucy, a lot of our associations can filter from our own personal experiences. So if we have an allergy, like maybe that's the first thing that pops in our mind. But just scanning through the chat, I see mostly jellies. And let's try this again, then I'll explain more what this means for us. I want you to think about a person that's in a leadership position. The person that's in a leadership position. You don't have to say who they are, but just picture that person. And how many of you envisioned a male of a person that's in a leadership role? You can type yes in the chat if you did. Yes, I see like a mix. I see a lot of yeses, some nos, but a lot of times when we think about our brain, like we're constantly making associations with things because we've seen these things go together so many times. And we know that peanut butter doesn't always have to go with jelly. And we know that leaders are not always men, but our brain makes these associations because we see these images over and over. And then that creates a level of implicit bias. And it honestly can show up just in our daily encounters, like the things like microaggressions, which are these subtle insults or slights that people experience. And with implicit bias, it can make another person feel uncomfortable, especially as our hidden attitudes are brought to the surface. And if you, I'll go back to the slide here, you can take an implicit association test. So Harvard has a great IAT test, so the Harvard Implicit Association Test, that can help us to recognize any hidden bias that we have. And they have a lot of different social identities and just different um, groups that are sometimes marginalized or mistreated. So it really helps a person to uncover their hidden bias. So next, we're going to talk about this idea of centralizing versus marginalizing. And part of the challenge with creating a supportive and inclusive space in the classroom is the fact that it may stem from this unacknowledged bias that a person may have. And this concept of what it means to be centralizing versus marginalizing, I pulled this information from a training, a free course online from Columbia University edX. And it's a training that has 6 modules that really provide the latest research on how we can create an inclusive environment. So the training was created by some of the leading researchers in the field that share their best practices. So with marginalizing, this refers to the fact that there are some people that are left out of the conversation, or marginalizing can occur when a person is stereotyped or made to be the token in the classroom, or if there's any type of microaggressions, any type of discriminatory behaviors, insensitive jokes or remarks, any offensive language, such as racist comments, sexist comments, or any of the isms like ableism, ageism, transgenderism. So, all of those are prime examples of marginalizing someone, which really makes it difficult for them to experience a sense of belonging. And think about how stressful it is for a person to experience microaggressions or stereotypes on a regular basis that will truly interfere with that person's ability to learn, to work, or even live safely in their environment. And we really want to focus on centralizing, which refers to us bringing diverse perspectives to the center of a space. So, for instance, when we're in the classroom, this would be us including student voices, including scholarly work from different perspectives, and then even thinking about work environments. So, we want to make sure that we have representation of people from diverse or all backgrounds who really have a seat at the leadership table or who are part of our faculty, just so we show that we are inclusive. And we're going to play just a quick game of how we can differentiate what it looks like to be centralizing versus marginalizing. And I'm going to show you a series of statements, which these are some sample microaggressions, stereotypes, or just experiences of actual students of what occurred for them like in the classroom or on their campus. So again, you're going to have to use the chat and you're going to type either A or B if the sentence is centralizing or marginalizing. So this one, I'm offering special tutorial because I know women struggle with math. So is the statement centralizing or marginalizing? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of B's, marginalizing definitely. And anyone want to share why this is marginalizing? Yes, I'm seeing in the chat. So specifying women in general, it assumes that women need help. It assumes women need help with math. It's a stereotype that women are bad at math, and yet singles out women. So imagine being in the classroom and experiencing or hearing a statement like that. And we know that that is false, the stereotype, that there are plenty of women that are great at math, and it just perpetuates this stereotype, which is false. So this one. So I'm holding office hours today at 2 p.m. for anyone who's interested in practicing a few additional problems. Would you say this is A or B? Yep, seeing a lot of A's. And we know it's A because we're being inclusive with our language. We're not just saying a few people, you need some more help with this math. We're opening it up for anyone who's interested in receiving additional practice or support. So this question, did everyone get a chance to watch the Netflix film I assigned last night? Yep, seeing lots of A's, but let's look closely at this though. So did everyone get a chance to watch the Netflix film that I assigned last night? So again, for this, it's actually B because like Donna's sharing, if you have Netflix, it costs. Like there's a fee that you have to pay to, I swear the prices go up like every year. So we can't make the assumption that every person has a Netflix account. Like that would be disinclusive for those who may not have access to a computer or internet or even the subscription service. Yep, and I'm seeing in the chat, it assumes that everyone has a Netflix account and then not everyone can see. Yep, that's another good perspective. For visually impaired students, not everyone has access to the internet. hmm So an alternative assignment is, I know at our campus library, there are access to um, databases with films or articles that are paid for through our college. Yep, and Alan shared if the professor assigned it, they need to make sure that all students can access it. Exactly. Okay, this one, we're going to discuss disabilities today. Claire, who's a person who uses a wheelchair. Do you mind sharing what your experience has been like having a disability? Yeah, so definitely B. So think about why this is a B. It almost falls into tokenism, where we're having this person speak for all people that would fit in a particular group. And we never really ask this person's permission for to learn if that's something that they feel comfortable doing. Yep, Riley, if the instructor had talked to Claire before the class about speaking up, maybe that would be okay. But assuming that, and they didn't speak with Claire ahead of time, so it's definitely marginalizing. And if they want to share, that's different. Correct. So we don't want to just single people out. We, again, need to have those conversations and see if that's something they're even comfortable doing. But we shouldn't assume or expect someone to want to do that. So this one, so I've noticed that this has been a challenging time for many students. I want to spend some time reviewing the supportive services we have on campus. So it's A or B. Definitely A, so centralizing. And let's say you did have a couple students come to you that are just experiencing some personal adversities. We don't want to single out that particular student, but that could serve as a perfect time just to remind the entire class about what supportive services are available. Because there's a greater chance that maybe another student is struggling or experiencing difficulties and could benefit from having that refresher. And then, Joanne, maybe you see an M instead of A or B reduces cognitive load. Mhm. So, lastly, it's really important for us to think through when it comes to inclusion. We know that the course climate can sometimes even shift, just like the weather. And we also know that each class is going to be unique. Students are going to have different identities and even intersecting identities. And it's really important for us to know like who your students are. So reflecting on who's in your classroom, but also who's not in your classroom. So we know that social constructs like power and privilege, they still can show up in a classroom. And each classroom really should embrace your students' varied identities and experiences. So building an inclusive environment really requires our commitment and effort and attention just to create these spaces where all students belong and feel respected, validated, and appreciated. I want us to go over a couple reflection questions. I want you to think about a time when you felt like you did not really matter. So when who you were or what you did was not valued. And then sometimes that marginalization is based off the interaction of some part of our identity, or the marginalization could come from our position within the group. Or sometimes it's just the result of some interpersonal interaction we have with another person. So you don't have to disclose the particular event or the circumstance, but I want you to think through what in that interaction let you know that you were not being valued? And then how did that interaction make you feel as a result? And then lastly, think about what were your behaviors or actions that occurred as a result of this interaction. So take about a minute just to think through. And again, you don't have to disclose the situation, but just think through how that situation made you feel or even how you reacted after the fact. Yeah, so Joanne sharing, like, no matter what you said or what you did, there was little compromise. Anger, sadness, yeah, those are big emotions. Donna sharing, just feeling undermined, hurt, not valued. Yeah, so it's very painful for us to experience marginalization, and it almost can stop us in our tracks. And it's nothing we asked for, and we're likely to be mistreated based off of a social identity that we have, or a group we belong to, or a particular role that we have. So it's definitely not a good feeling for us. And the idea is, how can we avoid creating this feeling for our students in our classrooms? And now I'll ask another question. So again, this is like what not to do when you think back to your own personal experiences of being marginalized. So let's reflect about this prompt. I want you to think about a time when you felt that you really mattered, when who you were or what you did was valued by others. And again, you don't have to disclose the actual event, but what in that interaction let you know that you were valued, and how did you feel as a result of that interaction? And then what were your behaviors or actions that occurred as a result of that particular interaction? Oops, sorry. Yeah, so take a minute just to reflect. Yeah, so Joanne sharing, people thanked me for what I did, and just the gratitude. hmm Donna sharing, I felt like my presence really mattered. So I felt on top of the world. I wanted to work harder. Yeah, so think about just that sense of appreciation or validation. It actually can lead us to act and want to do more, like work harder. So it's a great example. Carolyn, the person listened. So just think about that warm, fuzzy feeling that you have when you're truly heard. Like that's such a powerful feeling to just be heard fully. So again, these are just reminders of the type of feeling we want our students to have in our classrooms. We want them to know that they're valued, that they're appreciated, and that like we care about their success or who they are as a person. And I know we've already reviewed this, but just to summarize some of the things we've discussed, but what are some of the ways that we can show our students they are marginalized or not valued? And these can be things that you've seen, that you've heard about, or that you've even witnessed in the classroom. But what things have you, or what are those ways that leads to marginalization. Yes, I'm seeing in the chat someone that's dismissing a question of a student. Oh, yeah, that's a big one, not pronouncing their name correctly. And there have been times where I've had students either write out the phonetic spelling of their name if we're like in a Zoom meeting, just to, or even practicing with the student, like taking the time to pronounce a student's name to make sure you get it right. hmm Someone making fun of their comments, yeah, that can be very painful where that student may not want to speak up again. The fact that they're laughed at for using their voice. So, yeah, those are all pretty painful ways. And then the opposite. So, what are those ways we can show our students that they are valued in the classroom? And I see Carolyn ignoring them, of course, that leads to marginalization. And then Adelaja, a lot of smiles or feeling honored. That shows that we value them. But again, what are some of the ways we can just show our students that we value them and value their presence? So Alan sharing just positive encouragement. Yeah, we all need that boost every once in a while. So just a general just encouragement is huge. Calling them, acknowledge their contribution. Yeah, just thanking people, like thanking them for responding to that question, calling them by name, hmm using their name in the comment. Yeah, addressing students by their name. And the more that we address our students by their name, we start to model that behavior, and our students will start to learn the names of other students in the classroom. So it just creates just the sense of um, appreciation for all voices to feel comfortable speaking up. Yep, Alan. So even the gentle encouragement of just giving them recognition or credit for speaking up, even if it is the incorrect answer, but just still letting them know that you appreciate them trying. So yeah, all those are really great ways and just simple practices that we can incorporate into our classroom. And I did just provide a couple of resources just to share of some research-based principles of how we can focus on that interaction in classrooms to support positive interactions and the development of an inclusive space, belonging, which all correlate to learning and students growing. Yeah, but I do appreciate each of you attending today's session and just providing your input in the chat of some really great strategies that are easy for us all really to integrate into our classrooms and knowing just the feeling of what it's like when we do belong or when we do experience that sense of appreciation or validation. It's going to show that our instructors care about us, and I'm going to be motivated to learn and want to contribute to this shared space of a classroom. So thank you all just for joining me. And I did see, I'll stop it here. And let me look in the questions here. Alan shared, we did the question about the syllabus with language. How would you do inclusive to help emphasize key things of importance? Um, I'm not clear what you mean by that question, Alan. So meaning if we're teaching a specific subject matter, I think it's nice. One example that I do in my classrooms, if there's a specific topic or subject matter that they would hope to learn more about this semester, that's a way of creating that inclusivity with just my course outline. And then I try my hardest to like try to include that specific topic or subject matter into my semester. But knowing I'm sure every class has their own expectations of what you must cover. So I can imagine it does take a little bit of consideration of how you're creating your classes. But I'm going to stop sharing. Yep, I stop sharing. I'll pass it back over. But thank you all for coming.
Thank you. It looks like all the time we have for questions. Thank you, Christina, and thank you all for attending today. We will be emailing you a link to view this recording of the webinar once it's available. If you or any of your fellow instructors are interested in presenting for our Learning and Growing webinar series, please submit your proposals to the Learning and Growing website, which I'm going to go ahead and link in the chat right now for easy access. And these free webinars are brought to you by Hawks Learning, an innovative educational courseware company. To learn more about our mastery-based course materials and how Hawks can enhance learning outcomes for you and your students, please visit hawkslearning.com. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and thank you all for attending today's webinar.